My name is Dr. NesrinAbu ENG, and I'm a psychiatrist and a family physician doctor. I have been here going on 9 years. At the beginning, when we didn't know what we were expecting, I didn't want to be around other people after work because we were exposed to others that had COVID. We had no idea about the transmission at the beginning. There were no PPEs. Patients were coming in with symptoms, and we still were expected to work with them, and we didn't have any like shield or anything else. I was fine putting myself out there with patients because we need to do patient care, but then when I would go home around other friends or friends that are older or that are immunocompromised or that have kids, I didn't want to expose them. So then I ended up being isolated because I wanted to be responsible and not have anybody else get sick from me. I wasn't feeling sick, but I didn't know what I was passing on to them. The employers were not giving you the time to quarantine or anything else. You're expected to work. So the exposure happened from patients and from co-workers. And there was no way of protecting myself, and there was no PPE. So there was the isolation socially and professionally in a way too. So I remember I'd have patients coming in coughing or having fever, and they're like, oh, it's nothing. Oh, it's the winter season. Oh, it's the flu. It's my allergies. I remember thinking, I think there's more to this. We need to do testing, but I had no control over a lot of stuff. I wore a face mask, I wore a regular mask, but I couldn't require them to wear a mask. I just recommended it, but you can't force patients. A lot of times in healthcare, you're placed in working situations that are not ideal, and you still have to be at them. And so, unfortunately, this is what we deal with even before the pandemic. And that, with the pandemic happening, it brought forth the problems that are already existing in the healthcare system of how providers are treated. That you're not the priority to be kept safe, that your safety comes last. People were asked for so long to go and isolate, and social distancing is the new thing so that you're helping everybody else. And then once people social distanced, then they became socially isolated. It's like once they went down inside the cave, they couldn't come out. And they became so identified with that. And that's what I ended up dealing with as a psychiatrist. People that did not have panic disorders before began to have panic disorders. People that didn't have agoraphobia began having agoraphobia. People that didn't have interpersonal difficulties began to have interpersonal difficulties. So I don't know that it became part of their identity as much as it became more of a complicated layer to their being and became part of their life of how do you expect me to be leaving? I'm not going to be leaving the house. Something bad is going to happen. So these people that never had these issues began having them, and then people that had some of these minor issues, it became central to their being. I read somewhere that they say the world is made out of atoms, but really the universe is made out of stories. And we as people, as humans, are made up of stories and relationships and community. So looking at the pandemic, what really became so clear to me is that we need to be in community. This whole idea of we're individual, we're on our own, we can do it on our own, it doesn't work. And then the more we isolated for social distancing, the more things came to surface with mental health difficulties and anxiety and substance use and depression and suicidality and all that. So to me, what I'm taking away from this part of it is, how do you come together as a community for the greater good has been my perspective on that. As healthcare workers, to me, with other healthcare workers, no matter what the specialty was, respiratory therapy, nursing, physical therapy, whatever it was, it did feel like to me that we are all on the front lines, that if I'm gonna get infected, if I'm gonna get exposed, they're right there next to me. If there's not enough PPE for me, I might give them to them because maybe they're doing intubations and something more acute and urgent compared to me. And so my connection to my other co-workers became stronger because I felt like we're in all of us in it together, and that people that were not healthcare workers would not get what it's like when you're coming home and you're not, you're changing your scrubs. You may not be going into the house with your loved ones because you're afraid they're gonna get infected. So then who are you hanging out with most of the time at work? It's your coworkers, because we're all exposed together. I was telling you before we started that I get to hear, like a psychiatrist, I get to hear these private stories one-on-one that then I don't get to share because it's private in the clinic. But there are so many of them that are so similar. And then the isolation comes where we're not sharing these stories, because when you share them, you connect. You know you're not alone. You know there were others also struggling. And somehow when you feel like you're part of that group, you feel stronger. You're not as alone, you're not as down, you're not as isolated. There's just something happens when we're connected.
Support for Facing a Changed World an oral history of the COVID-19 pandemic, comes from the Margaret Ann Martin Everest Foundation, the Kind World Foundation, Humanities Iowa, the Friends of Siouxland Public Media, and listeners like you.